your neighbor. But now I tell you something new. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This is the whole of the scripture from Jeremiah and even before, all the way to Jesus. This new thing was hidden there in Jeremiah also. This is what it is about. Loving our enemies, loving the city, loving the community, seeking the peace, shalom, and blessing of the community. So let's talk about community development, this transforming the city, transforming the community. What is it all about? Dr. John Perkins, in his book, Beyond Charity, he says this: it is time for the church, yes, the whole church, to take a whole gospel on a whole mission to the whole world. This is the holistic gospel being lived out in the whole community. So I want to talk a little bit about Nehemiah and Jerusalem, where there were the folks who escaped the exile, those who were left. And let's look a little bit at communities that are in trouble and what we can see out of the book of Nehemiah. So first, in chapter 1, they talked about the people who are the remnant of Jerusalem who are in great trouble and disgrace. So one of the things you see in communities that are in trouble is an embodied shame, right? You heard that from Michael as well, just how he considered himself, how he looked at himself. In Melbourne, Florida, where I served with Love in the Name of Christ, there was a community, the neighborhood was called the Booker T. Washington neighborhood. There was a part of Booker T. Washington that was called and known as the Bottoms. The Bottoms. So there's a great ministry called Neighbor Up who started partnering with the Booker T. Washington neighborhood. They started doing youth and children's tutoring and programs, and the kids started growing up, generations of time where the kids are growing up, becoming young adults, and they kept looking. They started the center there, and then across the street was the neighborhood called the Bottoms. And they found some money, found some partnerships, and all the houses they tore down and built new houses and renamed the community, no longer the Bottoms, but now it's the neighborhood Greater Heights, right? This, to me, is a very clear picture of embodied shame, we live in the Bottoms, to God's transformational work, we are living in Greater Heights, right? Now, it has to be more than a name change. It has to be a change of how we consider ourselves, how we look at ourselves, how we're living in community. But this we see in Nehemiah, this embodied shame that we have to address. And so I love with the redemptive compassion work, how we're working with Love in the Name of Christ in order to see people's minds changed and removing that embodied shame, not just from the individual life, but also from the community. In chapter 1, verse 3, they talk about the walls being broken down, the gates are burned down. In chapter 4, verse 11, they're starting to rebuild the walls. And the enemies of the people say, we know what we're going to do. We're going to come while they're building the wall, and we're going to kill them. The threatened violence, right? And then this guy Sanballat, I don't even know who he is, but he shows up in chapter 6, and he's like, listen, everybody knows Nehemiah and you Jews, you're starting your own thing. The king is going to find out. And what is he going to do? He starts intimidating them, right? What does Nehemiah say? Yeah, true. He just shuts them down. I love it. He ain't going to be intimidated. They're not going to be threatened by violence. They keep building the walls. They keep stepping up, and he shuts down the intimidation, right? But this is what is happening in many of our neighborhoods. Young kids being intimidated, threats of violence, day in and day out. What are we, the church, doing about the broken walls, the unsafe conditions, the violence, the intimidation that is happening in our community? Two more things I want to point out from Nehemiah. You see a poverty, class, broken economic systems. The people there are farmers. They're harvesting, but the way they do it is by taking on debt. They're mortgaged. And they even say, you know what are we going to do? We don't even own the land. So we have to give our money. It's like a debt system. And then they go so bad where they have to sell their own kids into slavery in order to keep farming and produce food. This is a horrible situation, and one that is not far from some of the situations that people are facing day in and day out when our economic systems are broken, right? We'll come back, talk a little bit about debt and ownership in a minute. Last one, abandoned neighborhoods. This is so amazing because he says, man, Jerusalem, chapter 7, Jerusalem is spacious, but it's empty. Everybody's gone. What causes people to leave communities? Well, a lot of this stuff, right? Sometimes people are picked up and removed. Lord, have mercy. What is happening in Ukraine now, I think about what could be happening. I don't know what is happening now, but this is literally some of the stuff that could be happening. If they are not being removed, they are running away, and it is leaving an abandoned community, right? So sometimes it happens through hostile takeover. Sometimes it happens because of segregation, where people decide, you know what, we're going to leave. Because there's people coming in that are different than us, we're going to leave, right? There was urban flight, and then it also happens because of gentrification, when people come back with wealth and come back in and separate people again, right? But this, in Nehemiah, shows abandoned neighborhoods, cities that are abandoned or separated, right? What are we doing about the cities that are abandoned? So I just want to mention 5 different areas of community development that we could look at in our communities, right? There's infrastructure, roads, houses, right? Government, what is the government systems doing? What are the laws? What do voting rights look like? What are the governmental pieces? Social systems, right? Race relations, racial equity. What are other social systems? Family prayer, right? What is happening in that? Cultural systems as well that we can look at. And then finally, the economic, which we have been talking about. What are those economic systems? Particularly ownership, I think, is important, but also debt and participation in wealth generation that are important things for us to look at concerning community development, transforming cities. The Bible never settles for a morality that deals with individuals. It always asks about social structures, government, law, social policy, institutions that can lead to freedom or lead to slavery. Walter Brueggemann in his book, Peace. Just a few years ago, I was lecturing